Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace and blessings to you all. I'm just waiting for my PowerPoint to be displayed. My name is Diki Sofjan. I'm from the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies based in Universitas Gadjah Mada, which is in the city of Yogyakarta. And it is the largest public university in Indonesia with around 68,000 students. So the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies is a PhD program, which is international, interdisciplinary, and interreligious. So it's a consortium of Indonesian public university, a non-confessional university, the Islamic University of Sunan Kalijaga, and the Christian University. So we offer a PhD in interreligious studies. I've been tasked to talk about peaceful well-being and inclusive societies. Yes, this is it. And basically, apart from being affiliated with ICRS, Gadjah Mada University, I'm also an international board member of Globe Ethics and a consul for the East Asian region. I'll talk more about that later on, but I'm also the CEO of the Ngelanggeran Eco Village, which is in the vicinity of the Yogyakarta region next to a 60 million year old ancient volcano. So basically, if the social media is anything to go by, we've seen a lot of sort of strange occurrences, strange things happening, and many reels and videos coming up into our smartphones and so on, yeah? And as though the COVID-19 pandemic did not sort of sufficiently made us smarter, but we have seen a lot of these sort of eyewitness accounts of reportings of what's called unidentified aerial phenomena or anomalous phenomena, if it includes the submersible phenomena also, and the terrestrial phenomena happening. It used to be called unidentified flying objects, typically. And, these kind of stories and narratives and videos popping up in our social media have also been described as having this sort of tremendous velocity and unmatched maneuverability and seemingly unaffected by gravity. And we've also been told that, extraterrestrial beings have lived among us for thousands of years. Maybe some of them are also here in this room. But then we've also seen, just very recently, news of very devastating natural disasters lately in Hawaii, in Turkey, and Morocco. And some of the witnesses have seen sort of preceding bright light in these tragic events with very high death tolls. Some say it's caused by the HAARP project by the US military, which is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, but some have called this the Direct Energy Weapon System, or the space laser, as they call it, sort of burning anything and everything along its pathway except for blue-collared objects. But now, as a social scientist and a professor of interreligious studies, obviously I'm not in any position to sort of make any judgments or assessments on any of these peculiar subject matters, but neither can I assume sort of to begin to understand these kinds of, strange and anomalous situations. But I think Frank Sinatra was right to a certain extent, when he said that the end is near. So now, as a practicing Muslim, now I'm not your sort of usual liberal, progressive Muslim like the CIA or MI6 would want me to be, but I aspire to becoming a God-conscious, sort of quintessential Muslim, who just like to think rationally and to be able to sort of engage the modern world and so on. But, even our dear beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did say that the sa'ah, the hour, and the end of days was coming soon. Yeah? And that was closer than the distance between our two index and middle fingers. Yeah? And so in his prophecy, the messenger of Allah had said that the sun will rise from the west and no longer from the east, and that there would be much calamity and disasters, a lot of strife, a lot of fitna. Righteousness will be sort of perceived by people to be false, and falsehood will be sort of cloaked in truth. In other words, the run-up to the Armageddon, would be hard to escape, for anyone, in terms of ignorance, in terms of the exemption from misinformation and disinformation. So this got me thinking really hard, why were ancient beliefs and religions, most notably the Semitic religions, were so preoccupied with the end of days? And why can't we just live a simple life, in peace under God, without having to sort of contend with such a bleak future? But then again, why is the future so important? Shouldn't we just focus on the present, as they say? Of course, in religion, future and foresight are relevant. In the realm of religious studies, for instance, we learn about the cosmology of things, the beginning of time, and also theology, which happens here in this world, where we develop, our thinking and belief systems. And then there's the eschatology, which is the sort of ultimate destiny of the humankind. So this has been there for thousands of years. So I should think that the futurists of today would take heed in terms of how religious people think about the future. And I realized since yesterday that there is this aversion to the ideas of religion in the talk about the future, But, why were there prophets? I mean, prophets, one of the characteristics of prophets is that they prophesize, right? And to prophesize means to sort of predict the future. And they were very good at it, at least most of them, And there are sort of features and characteristics and things to come, so to speak. And hence, you find a lot of millenarian movements, end-of-day movements in today's world. Yeah? In fact, just maybe a couple of decades ago, we had one here in Selangor. Yeah? We had the Sky Kingdom with the teapot cult, if you remember that. Yeah? And there are many. There are plenty of them in Indonesia, plenty of them in America. I'm sure all of you remember David Koresh movement in Waco, Texas, and so on and so forth. Yeah? But one might say, I don't believe in all of that thing, about religion, about, But think about it, 85% of people in this world still believe in a God and or universal spirit. And it has been sort of relatively constant with a minor downturn. So despite all of the sort of calls for secularization and the rise of the nuns and unaffiliated, we are still seeing a large number of people who believe in God and or universal spirit. And if you look at Asia Pacific, for instance, Asia Pacific has the highest RDI, or this is the Religious Diversity Index, as compared to any other regions of the world. So there is a case to make here that we can sort of try to extract some of the lessons from religion and the spiritual resources that we have in this region to sort of try to help us predict the future. What's interesting is, if you look at the, it is hard here. I'm trying. Yeah. Anyways, you've probably seen it, yeah. And this is one map that many people don't realize, have not seen, that we have 1 billion Muslims, at least here in the Asia-Pacific region. We tend to think Islam or Muslims in the Middle East or something, yeah? But we have more than 1 billion now of Muslims in the region. And if you see the growth of religion, this is equally interesting because Islam has been seen as the fastest growing religion compared to any other religions. And hence you find that that Islam has become a potent force in many countries. This is caused by three reasons. One is a high birth rate among Muslims. Second is immigration, and third is conversion. I mean, I've known friends who are very close and dear to me in Singapore who have 5 children, and they're living in HDB flats. Yeah? So the Malay Muslims are really have been very active. But apart from that, we are also seeing that the Muslims will overtake the Christians. You see, about 100 years ago, the world was predominated by Hindus. And then came colonialism and many other dynamics, and then Christianity became the predominant religion. But now, according to the Future of Religion survey done by Pew Research, they say that Muslims will overtake the Christians. And when we say Christians here, it's the Catholics, the Protestants, and the Eastern Orthodox, and many other denominations of Christianity. The other interesting development is that we'll see our neighbor Indonesia rising to the fore. Yeah? Indonesia is right now probably number 16, but in like maybe 25 years down the line, it's going to be number 4 in terms of its GDP, yeah? Surpassing even Japan. So the question is Malaysia ready for that as well? And of course, as you know, Indonesia has the largest Muslim nation in the population. And so, we need to think about all of these things, I think, as we grapple with the future. I think without looking at religion, without looking at 85% of the population, I think we're in for some surprises as well. These are just some of the works that I've been engaged in terms of looking at nature and culture, looking at spirituality, looking at religion, looking at Islam, and trying to look at how religious people, spiritual people look at sustainability, And of course, many of these people, religious, spiritual people, as well as indigenous communities, they don't use the term sustainability. They usually use the term regeneration. So maybe that is one of the things that we could also try to consider, because sustainability, or at least sustainable development, has become this sort of technocratic term that we have used, namely by the UN bureaucrats and all. Yeah, but this is my own sort of definition in terms of what the hardware of ecological sustainability is, and that is looking at the sort of internal drivers of sustainability. And this, of course, involves the religious and the spiritual dimensions of ecological sustainability, and why people, for instance, are drawn to want to conserve their planet, and so on and so forth. So just very quickly, these, and I'm also happy that OIC and ISESCO, for instance, has shifted gears in terms of looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, in which they have, in early October 2019, have declared that zakat and waqf, this is religious tithing and religious endowment, could be used for sustainable development goals. So this is one step which has I think needs to be appreciated. These are just some of the projects that I'm doing. I'm doing a project on eco-pesantren, so looking at Islamic traditional boarding schools. We have 40,000 Islamic traditional boarding schools across the archipelago in Indonesia, and we're looking at 50 sample Islamic traditional boarding schools and how they project sustainability and how they teach sustainability and conservation in their traditional boarding schools. These are the 10 indicators that we are using. We are working with the Templeton Foundation, the Islam Science and Society program that they have. And just for my last comment, this is my most recent work. I developed a eco-village, which is probably 50 minutes away from my university. I bring my friends there, professor friends, academic friends there, and also my students there. In Islam, when we talk about Al-Jannah, when we talk about paradise, there is this constant sort of narrative about, rivers that flow beneath. Al-Jannatu adnin tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. So below here is a really beautiful river in which you can see, and this is my way of sort of trying to prove some of the theories that I'm looking at, and trying to sort of walk the talk, as they call it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diki. Now please welcome Ivana Milojevic.
I think over the last few days we've been told many times that futurists do not predict the future. I am going to make a prediction though. The PowerPoint will not work. And I will not be able to figure out how to press the right buttons and everything. So some people say that to be a successful futurist really need to be a good historian above all things. So we do learn from the past. And it is important to understand how past events shaped us. We just do a slight shift where we refocus on things that are having a different perspective and different gaze. And I think specifically for conflict, which is what I will be talking about, future's perspective is invaluable. Because the past is done, it's finished, it's over, and certainly you can do something with that as a historian. If you want to create alternative future, you also have to create alternative past. And I think every single organization or community or a society or a social movement has been doing that. Women's movement, we talked a bit about that, has been creating alternative past away from the narratives that were predominantly patriarchal, where women were not to be seen or heard, where women were to stay in the public sphere, where women were not powerful, actually, or relevant. So Fatima Marnisi, if you know her work, she was bringing different history into the open, talking about forgotten queens of Islam. So she was trying to reframe the discourse, and many other women who are Muslim scholars were also reframing the discourse, creating alternative past. Now, obviously, the past is past, you can't change it, but how we see it and how we interpret it is critical in the way we create futures. In the area of peace and conflict studies, this is as well critical, because often when we think about our past, and I'm not sure about Malaysia, I think here it's different, but many societies, and especially societies that I spend quite a bit of time in, focus on violent pasts. So they teach us how in the past you had all this conflict, all these violent conflicts. We hear narratives about humans being violent by nature. When you look at nature documentaries, it is not a lion sleeping 23 hours per day. It is that 1 hour when a lion is chasing a gazelle, because that's where the action is. Science fiction movies are like that. Action movies are like that. There is so much violence. I mean, I personally struggle to find movies where there is no violence in them, direct violence. But then when you look at us here, I haven't seen anybody punched another person yet over the last 2 days. Maybe you wanted to, I don't know. But most of us, most of the time, act peacefully. And in this region, I found it very inspiring, given my country of origin. When I was in Brunei for 14 months, I haven't seen one open conflict. One open conflict. I know there is lots of passive-aggressive behavior, I've been told, and I know there are things that are happening on the side, but not in terms of full-on violent conflict. So cultures definitely deal with conflict very differently. And I would like to talk about that a little bit, but also more see in which ways can we create this new paradigm globally that is unified, because we do have these differences, but then we also have lots of things that we have in common. And I would say our human nature, being predominantly peaceful. We choose peace if we can, so that response or fight, flight, freeze is actually wrong order. It should be, we try to avoid conflict. Most of us are conflict avoiders, and then we try to flee if we can, and then we fight as a last resource. Or we fight if it's a habitual response. We've been taught to do that. So our thinking around these issues has been colonized. It's been colonized by certain histories. It's been colonized by patriarchy. When we talk to hunter-gatherer societies, for example, that's a wrong terminology, because we know that those type of societies mostly gathered their nourishment from gathering. But because that was seen as women's work, it became second. So it should be actually gathering, hunting societies. So I think it's very important conceptual work we do around these things. We look at the history, we look at alternative histories to be able to think about our present while getting inspiration from alternative futures. So as we heard over the last 2 days, it's always this process that goes back and forth, back and forth. All right, so PowerPoint is not working, but can I still have it there, please? If possible. So my first question, or 3 questions actually, one very ambitious, Forrest Gump. What do we actually mean when we talk about creating peaceful, well-being, and inclusive societies? Very often we use this terminology like child-centered education, and there is nothing centered on a child in those systems of schooling. But, you know, it's like, what do we actually mean when we use that terminology? And I would like to offer kind of perspective that connects peace studies and future studies, and peace-oriented thinking and futures thinking. So what do we mean by peaceful? What do we mean by well-being? And what do we mean by inclusion? The first thing is, what do we mean by peace? Very often when we think about peace, we think about peace as something that just exists, or that's something that miraculously happens after everybody's tired of punching each other out. So there's this war, conflict, etc., and then people get exhausted, or they are kind of beaten into submission, and then we have peace. Okay? So very often we think about peace as a state, but in peace theory, and then obviously linking it with futures thinking, peace is not a state, it's a process. Moreover, there are different types of peace. There is negative, positive, and holistic peace. Negative peace is pure absence of direct violence, so no one's punching anybody out. Structural peace is positive peace is the absence of structural violence. What do we mean by structural violence? Anytime you have a woman who dies giving birth, that is probably a type of structural violence, if that was avoidable. So if it was somewhere else happening, or if there are resources in that community or a country, and yet a woman still dies, that's a type of structural violence. Structural violence is it happens anytime somebody dies from homelessness or poverty, because there are resources in this world and in most our societies where we have sufficient everything to not make that happen. So positive peace is then absence of structural violence, or better to say presence of something else, of politics, building of structures, nurturing of values, and creation of culture that will prevent or minimize possibility of violence arising in the first place. So anytime you yourself engage in trying to get your communities or societies get closer to those visions and goals that we heard on a day first from Tan Shi Zul, or in other sessions, SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, you are actually enacting peace. So you are using that peace as a process, and all of you, I'm convinced, are peacemakers on a daily basis in your daily life, personal life, as well as in your organizational life, and as citizens of a community or of a society. Now, we can then go a bit further, and this is me trying to summarize the development of peace thinking and theory that happened in a century, over 20th century. So first it was focused on that absence of direct violence, and then there is an expansion towards absence of structural. Systemic includes economic, cultural, epistemological, economic violence. And then somewhere 60s onwards, last century, people started talking more about ecological and psychological violence. Now, these type of violences are all connected. Epistemological violence, which is how we think about the world, is always a precursor for structural and direct violence. So it's really important we get our categories right, I think. And then, obviously, on the other hand, building holistic peace means establishment of life-affirming and life-enhancing values and structures through spirituality or psychology or worldview, particular worldview, harmony within oneself, within community, amongst different groups of people, peace with the world and the environment. And I think the goal is that expansion of peace. The vision is the expansion of peace at all levels. We heard a lot about that, being self-reflective and not creating peace externally and then in your own family creating violence, which is also what we see a lot happen when things are not integrated. Now, as a historian, and some of you may know about previous generation of thinkers, Johann Galtung, who, along with Elise Boulding, was among first futurists to start making these links. He has a brilliant typology of violence that says that anytime basic human needs are jeopardized, when they are not being satisfied, when there is this basic impairment of fundamental human needs, then you have a type of violence. And those basic human needs are, I believe, universal. We all need to survive. We all want to feel good, have some sort of well-being. All of us need to belong to a community, to a family, need to have purpose in life, otherwise we get depressed. And finally, we need some sort of fun and freedom happening at the same time. You can see that inclusion and well-being are part of this typology. So what do we mean by peace, well-being, and inclusion? I would like to say that it is about creating societies and communities which pursue negative peace. Negative peace is important because when you have that direct violence, it's very hard to work on holistic and positive peace. You just try to be a firefighter, which was one of the metaphors we were using here as well. And then consistently build positive peace and nurture holistic peace initiatives. Now, those are, what you're not seeing are some ideal models, how some peaceful societies and communities and individuals operate, where there is very little conflict and violence, and then you have extreme of lots of conflict and violence to the point of wars of extermination, limited wars to wars of extermination, where we all perish because somebody decided that dropping a nuclear bomb is a good idea. Now, this is a more poetic way to think about and talk about conflict. It's from Rebecca Wisby, who took our conflict transformation course, and she said that she sees conflict as the boats upon the sea of relationships. Sometimes you have smooth sailing, and sometimes it's stormy, and then you have to be sort of flexible in trying to decide which direction to go to. Now, what I would like to add, now I've gone through many slides, more conventional definition of conflict is to strike or clash together. And I would like to add to that definition that this clash is commonly based on what appears as incompatible futures. If I can go back, that will show there. When I say that clash, conflict, is commonly based on what appears as incompatible futures. Sometimes our visions are incompatible, but most of the times they're not. Most of the times we engage in this, what Freud talked about, narcissism of minor difference. So we start focusing on these little things, like within feminism, is it women, Western or Eastern or post-colonial or spiritual or ecofeminism or cyber-feminism, forgetting that there is a bigger picture out there, and that by doing this narcissism of minor difference and infighting, you actually directly strengthen patriarchy. It's a strategy of dividing and conquering, yeah? It's a very old one as well. So this is how I would see peaceful, well-being-oriented and inclusive societies are those that, as I said, avoid and actively work towards avoiding violence, creating negative peace, but also work on creating positive and holistic peace, and then also know how to skillfully and constructively deal with conflict. What do I mean by that? I think there may be two, let's say, to get this complexity simplified, there are two basic ways of dealing with conflict. One is destructive, where conflict either gets stuck or escalates. And I know as futurists, once again, we're not supposed to be giving predictions. At the same time, we know if we engage in certain types of behavior, that is more likely going to lead to X and not Y. If you invest so much of your budget into military and you develop the capacities and you do all the training for war and violence, if that is where your mind goes to, more likely that is going to lead towards developing that type of kind of outcome and developing those type of strategies. Constructive ways of dealing with conflict, on the other hand, is to use conflict to create different, better futures. Conflict, as we heard from Samantha earlier, is very difficult to avoid in our time and age, and we can again anticipate that it's going to increase, because we've seen conflict increases anytime we are under stress and anytime things are changing. So given how much things are changing and given how much some of that change is uncomfortable for people, I think we can anticipate rising conflict. There are some areas that are contributing to less conflict, but I think overall it is, let's say, more likely. So this constructive way of dealing with conflict is to use that conflict. Instead of trying to pretend it doesn't exist, or she'll be right, it won't escalate. How many minutes?
Time's up.
Time's up. Okay, so I'll finish here. So instead of presenting, as I said, pretending that it's not going to escalate, we say, okay, conflict is here, is that elephant in the room, and we are going to utilize it for creating better future, developing positive and kind of holistic peace. Just one more point. Our predecessors who've done work in this area have said that anytime you have a conflict, it's always much better to orient yourself towards the future than towards the past. Because when you look at the past, you usually start listing all these arguments, what the other person is wrong, all the things they've done to you, etc., etc. When you go to a future, you're immediately in a much better space because it's open, it's flexible, there is some distancing from present, there are multiple alternatives, which is also critical. You can see what happens if conflict escalates, what happens if it de-escalates. You can use futures wheel to see what are the second, third, and fourth rate consequences, etc., etc. So that is an important point, to use future to rather than past to deal with a conflict in the present moment. However, future as well can be used in a very destructive way. So there is a constructive use of past and future, and thinking about peace histories, for example, is a constructive use of past, listing all the reasons why the other should be deleted from whatever existence. is destructive use of the past. Constructive is thinking about all the times we lived together peacefully in the past and our human history collectively being that. Now with the future, we are immediately in a much better space, as I said, and theories before me made that point as well. Practitioners as well. So you think about alternatives, you think about multiple options, you think about preferred futures. When we do this work, hardly anybody chooses war, violence, destruction. You know, most people want to have decent existence. However, there is a danger of using future destructively as well, and that is something we can call neurotic futures fantasizing, where people basically just want the other group to disappear. We do that a lot. It's a precursor to ethnic cleansing and all sorts of behaviors that we as humans engage. So constructive use of future, constructive use of past, and dealing with conflict in a constructive way is, I think, a key to creating peaceful, inclusive, and well-being societies. Thanks.
Thank you, Ivana. All right, in our continued exploration of inclusive societies, we now move into a moderated panel session titled Inclusive Societies from Foresight to Insight to Action. May I invite on stage our moderator, Shimon Cruz, and our panelists, Pravesh Chowdhury, Seong Woon Park.
Okay, that was a good entrance.
All right. And Panet Bernalak.
That's insight to action. Sorry about that.
Okay, be careful, please. Right.
Okay, so what we're going to have is a rapid-fire moderated discussion about inclusive societies. And really one of the more profound and I would say more compelling conversation we should have as foresight practitioners and enthusiasts, while rather we will try to quickly do this with the amount of time that we have, is the issue and futures of the inclusive societies. And of course, the biases that we get to uncover as practitioners, designers, partners, researchers, teachers, consultants, among others. There are many undercurrents, that comes with it as foresight and inclusivity intersect, but then I think that foresight exercises does not necessarily or naturally leads to inclusive outcomes. And that it is not explicitly, in fact, for many foresight designs that I've seen and have read, focused on inclusivity, unless it is designed otherwise. But allow me to introduce quickly our speakers for today, who fortunately had the opportunity to work with over the years, Pravesh Chowdhury, of course, a futures researcher and distinguished fellow at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. And we all know that Pravesh is an award-winning futures researcher and strategic narrative professional. And Dr. Seong Woon Park leads the Innovative Growth Research Group of the National Assembly Futures Institute of the Republic of Korea, and authored several books, like What Alternative Futures Do We Want? And The Future Is My Power. He was named an outstanding young futurist by the World Future Studies Federation, and his work was named Best Paper by the Association of Professional Futurists. And last but not the least, Fanet, who is a technical officer, strategic dialogue for the World Health Organization. She leads the strategic dialogue team at the Western Pacific Regional Office of the World Health Organization. So let's get into this conversation about inclusivity. I would like to ask more about you sharing your experiences as a practitioner when it comes to inclusivity. What gives you hope about the possibility of truly inclusive societies? And what do you see as challenges and obstacles ahead? So perhaps we can start with Seong Woon.
Okay, thank you, Sherman. My name is Seong Woon Park. I'm working for National Assembly Futures Institute, which is Korea Parliament Futures Institute. We are a public think tank, and 5 years ago, maybe 2018, the Korea Parliament decided to establish a Futures Institute because always government forecast kind of short-term future and futurists in Korea always insist that we need to establishment of a permanent institute to look for kind of a long-term perspective. As Sherman asked me, kind of regarding inclusive society, I have kind of some words for you. I would like to talk about we need what we need to do as a future researcher to go beyond an inclusive society and create, I insist, a more inclusive society. The word more has been added in front of the word inclusive society. I believe that in order to develop a more inclusive society, we need to imagine the future society. I think that in order to perceive reality as it is, in other words, in order to perceive the various changes that are taking place in today's world, we need a great deal of imagination. We have to observe and analyze the real world in detail in order to understand the various changes that are taking place in the world today. However, I think this method has its limitations in discovering small changes. To understand the complex real world, we have to develop average thinking. As you all know, the normal distribution curve is symmetric. The closer to the center, the more cases are collected. The closer to the edge, the fewer cases there are. So edge cases are what we call outliers. So this is true in the sense that it is cases that deviate from the average. These cases do not attract our attention. So they are exceptional. Because of average thinking, their existence is overlooked or ignored. So regarding challenging features that I face, always policymakers or lawmakers ask futurists give evidence or give lots of information in order to enact a new law. But we need to push them to the edge that the society will face in the future. So can I continue or?
Yeah, we can go back to your point after.
Yeah. So, okay, let me finish this one and then.
Okay, thank you, Sungwon, about that. Yeah, I would like perhaps, to go to a Fanet, about the question like, what gives you hope about the possibility of building a truly inclusive society, and what are the challenges and obstacles ahead?
Thank you. Thanks, Prof. Sherman. Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you for having us. It's really an honor for me to be here. It's the first time that we're participating in APFN, and it's been so far very inspiring. Just before I get into your question, I just also want to start by saying that I also am not a researcher. I'm very much a practitioner and a beginner practitioner of foresight. In WIPRO, we've started using Futures and Foresight about 4 years ago. And so what I'm going to share is really rooted in just in our experience and practice. Let me start by first talking about the challenge. I think in the work that we've been doing using Futures and Foresight with policymakers in the region, and especially in the health sector, what we found is that, in the health sector, because of all the compounding crises that we're facing in the present, it's a bit hard to get our colleagues to sometimes stop trying to fight today's fight and to open that space for future exploration. But what gives me hope is once that space opens and once, you get people together in a room to talk about and to think about the future, then that's when the really transformative solutions and pathways start to emerge. And all of these kind of lead to more inclusive futures. So Futures and Foresight for us really help craft spaces to rethink and reframe how we view and think about health and the solutions that are going to help us achieve health for all.
Yes, thank you for that, Fanette. Prabhaj, I would like to ask you this, particularly to your experience. Are there particular groups or communities, that are often overlooked in foresight exercises? And how can these be addressed? Like just your thoughts about this.
What I found really interesting is what Ivana said, narcissism of minor differences. How we overcome those differences is one of the most challenging things that I've experienced working across generations. Now, what I found quite interesting is that, when I'm in a room filled with bureaucrats, it's a very different exposure into their way of thinking. And it's often quite challenging as to how do you navigate the complexities of the way they think into confining them to an approach which you think would perhaps work in decision-making circles. However, what truly excites me is working with 18 to 20-year-old students in universities. That gives me hope, because a lot of these young people, with the kind of exposure that they have through these new technologies, is what is the difference between a generation which is older than them and a generation that they engage in. And so within that, what I found that has worked is doing a lot of scenarios workshop. And I was just telling Kenneth here also, is in my classes, I do teach strategic communication, has nothing to do with foresight or futures, but that is relatively what is sticking in Pakistani universities right now. But what I do in the initial part of my classes is that I do a lot of scenarios work. And those scenarios are basically personal scenarios with a horizon up to 50 years or 40 years. What that does do is, regardless of whichever context these students are coming from, it creates an environment of appreciation for one another. And once that happens, the level of openness that I get to experience in that classroom, it could be of 40 students or 50 students, it's so different than going into a public policy institute and training bureaucrats. And the energy that you acquire in the process, in both cases, one drains it completely and the other just amplifies it. So the preference always rests with working with 18 to 22 years old.
So I would like to go back to you. I think I remember we had a conversation the last APFN conference about foresight, at least in a public policy context, and given your experience, working with, politicians and bureaucrats in the South Korean government, are there cases wherein, some sectors are marginalized or not heard in foresight conversation at the policy level? And what can we do about it? Like, at least in your own experience, like some lessons learned.
Let me explain what happened while establishing National Assembly Futures Institute maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Usually, at that time, most MP, members of parliament, disagree to establish the Futures Institute because there were two reasons. Maybe I can explain the two reasons that National Assembly disagreed to establish the Futures Institute. I want to quote from MP. He said that it is possible to maintain political neutrality in matters such as climate change or international peace, but it is difficult to rule out political tendencies in studies dealing with foreign strategy, parliament, democracy, and role of a civil society. This is because an issue in which the position of political parties and social groups are clearly divided. And another quote from MP, he or she said that reunification, welfare, and public servant pension issues are nationally important issues, but there are many controversies. If National Assembly Futures Institute research differ from our party's ideology, we will be shocked. So they are worried about the result of our institute provide a very controversial issues based on different values that other parties pursue. And then other issue is that another quote from MP, in a country with a single 5-year presidential term, what the president can do is limited. But if the Futures Institute comes up with a long-term strategy, policy priorities may change, and opposition party will try to attack the government based on the long-term strategy. So these are kind of problems and barriers and obstacles that futurists face in the National Assembly. Let me give you a kind of one example how we try to overcome these barriers. Regarding a more inclusive society, we are researching on emerging citizen research, not emerging issues. Because citizens are there, so politicians, lawmakers can observe where the emerging citizen is. I conceptualize that emerging citizen is a citizen who are now minority, but in the future they become majority. So we need to consider their existence. So let me give you an example who emerging citizen is. Maybe you know that climate refugees and gig economy workers and transgender non-binary individuals, aging LGBTQ plus community, single-parent families, and in the future, maybe digital native and digital immigrants, and individuals whose jobs are taken away by artificial intelligence, and recipients of universal basic income, genomic citizens, or virtual citizens, or artificial intelligence citizens, and space colonists. I mean, these are minority in the world or in the society in Korea, but their unique needs that we have to consider in forecasting the future in order to make a more inclusive society. So I suggest emerging citizen research as a futurist to build a kind of a more inclusive society.
Yes, thank you. Fanet, the next question is for you. You know, I've seen, some of the works that the World Health Organization, did for several years about mobilizing and, generating conversation surrounding the future of universal healthcare access, right? And I've seen the work that you did in partnership with the Department of Health. Now, this is a question particularly to the tools and methods. What are the tools and methods that the World Health Organization are actually using, perhaps to ensure that people, in fact, those that we have invited, let's just say we consider them as marginalized, to have their voices included in the conversation that we're having or you're facilitating as far as universal healthcare access is concerned?
Yep. So the type of work that we do is we support strategic dialogues on the future of health and well-being, and these strategic dialogues are national high-level dialogues with senior policymakers usually. But what futures and foresight and the fact that we are talking about the future enables us to do is it enables to move the conversations beyond the traditional kind of silos that we often encounter in health, where we like our vertical programs and things like that, to have a much more holistic view and approach of health, and to include different sectors, partners, and also maybe more importantly, types of interlocutors. One of the things that these processes have helped us to do is, next to the expert in the room who is going to talk about, health financing, you can actually have, youth organizations who are going to share their aspirations and their views for the future. And it's very important that these aspirations and these ideas are centered when it comes to making decisions for the future of health, because first of all, we are planning for future generations, and second of all, I think it's the role of the public sector that we are accompanying and representing to also center this question of equity, which if we don't do it, if it's not front and center, then it can get overlooked when it comes to thinking about the future.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I've had one experience working with a national government agency, right? And then initially the design was just to include like around 45 people, like high-level people, 45. But then everybody started speaking about accountability, right? This is the future of a particular agenda for economic growth. And you have like around 35, 45 people having a conversation about the future of economic growth, right? But then somebody asked me, can we make it 800, Sherman? Wow. Now my question is, at least from your experience and then perhaps some learnings that you have over the years, is that, given that there are many distinguishing factors that must be addressed when we want to be inclusive, like gender, race, socioeconomic factors, background status, abilities, religion, et cetera, then perhaps, when you put these people together, the epistemes comes in, right? The value judgment, when they start having a conversation about their preferable or plausible future, among others. Can inclusivity slow down or complicate the foresight process?
I think yes and no, depending on the sort of generation you're with. So in my experience, in a generation when we're sitting above people above 50 years, I'm not being, ageist or anything, but just a disclaimer there. But when you're sitting amongst people beyond a certain age group, the ideas sort of embedded within their mindset are so difficult to budge or accommodate a very different perspective, is to channelize their thinking becomes quite a task. So regardless of how inclusive you are, it becomes a battle zone of different conflicts in silos. So, so really bridging all of those factors requires a lot more headspace, a lot more energy goes into it. You move into a different category of entrepreneurs if you work with entrepreneurs. The challenge of being inclusive there is usually very time-driven. So time becomes a very important factor. How as quickly can you move through a workshop or through the process of using foresight? You move into a classroom setting of, say, 18 to 20-year-old. I think the most incredible value that I found with them is they can still be fascinated by learning new things in a manner that they have not been accustomed to learning. So pedagogy really works in terms of the effectiveness of how the other person can learn. So that being one, I think awe and wonder is when you're using foresight is the tools that you need to incorporate while being inclusive. And as you do that, when you move across generation, how you integrate those factors become really important. So it is very audience dependent, it is very participants dependent. So you have to take yourself out of the picture and really focus on the sort of audience that you're addressing.
Yeah, same question. Same question to Fanette. What do you think, your views on this? Right? Can it slow it down or complicate the process, like inclusivity?
I mean, yes, it might slow it down. I think we were, and we are, lucky enough to have been able to express also the idea that sometimes in foresight, the process itself is more important than the output or the outcome that you're trying to reach. And so it makes sense to take things slow, to course correct as you go because you've realized that maybe you forgot someone along the way, or this perspective is not coming out strongly enough, and because the process also builds foresight capacity amongst participants, and that's how you plant the seeds, I feel like. So it's really important, and it's a continuous dialogue that we have to have also with, the policymakers, because they want the outputs. They will have more interests themselves in what comes out than the process itself. But we are fortunate enough, and we work towards making that understood that the process itself matters as well, and we will not be able to achieve more inclusive health or inclusive health futures without bringing various voices along on the journey. So yeah.
Thanks for that. I would like to hear your thoughts on this, Song-Woon.
Dialogue, I think it is very important things for futurists. I mean, I look at many articles in the field of future studies. I often recognize that two words come together. Dialogue and future. So dialogues on the futures. So that's why I, many years ago, since then, I give opportunity, I provide kind of futures workshop with lay persons many times. Because, I, in my term, self-efficacy on futures, because they have to have their ability to influence their future or society. So they have to believe that they can impact the society while in forecasting the future. So how can I let them perceive self-efficacy toward the future? They have to get a kind of opportunity to forecast the future. So many times I provide a futures workshop with people, and we have kind of a common sense about what Korea will be, and beyond that, what Korea should be for their present generation and also future generations. So dialogue is very important things. And also, I mentioned already, we have to identify emerging citizens. In-depth research on emerging groups, and then we have to challenge the status quo or stereotypes of people. Then through the dialogue, people are aware of what their unique needs is and who they are. And then we can kind of build inclusive society.
Wow, I think the battery is off. Yes, those are good thoughts, and this leads me to ask the next question, because Pravesh brought out, the biases that comes out, right, like in a foresight exercise or conversation. These things are revealed, not just the positives, including the biases that we have, traumas of people, it could generate into some sort of a conflict as well in the process, and especially when we try to have a conversation about the preferable or what's plausible really. Okay. So my next question is, at least from the perspective of the foresight practitioner and the facilitator and perhaps the designer, is the question regarding, ethical considerations that we need to take note of into foresight exercises, especially when we're dealing with sensitive topics that comes out, right, in this foresight conversation related to inclusivity.
Oh, sorry, my alarm just went off. I thought I was pointing. Completely missed out. Can you
Okay, sure. Yes. Let me repeat that, right? In a foresight conversation, several things comes out, like the hopes, the fears, the dilemmas and traumas, the alternative and preferable and plausible worlds, right? These are real conversation when it comes to policy, and especially so when you talk about, being inclusive, right? The epistemes comes in. Now the question is, what are the things that we need to consider, or how can we integrate ethical considerations as foresight practitioners, right? Especially when we're dealing with sensitive issues of inclusivity.
I think one of the aspects that I was thinking earlier also to your previous question is that in foresight practice also gamification really helps. When you gamify and also when you're designing the process, you keep into consideration the kind of participants you have around the table. And biases often people do sort of reveal their biases when there is a dialogue in process as the ethical dimension is to not to stereotype, not to judge. So you've got to understand, as foresight practitioner in the room, you cannot judge someone by the sort of ideas, but the sort of beliefs that they come from. So having a very, I wouldn't say like a neutral view, but having a very a view of how you can facilitate. So the facilitation has to be sort of bias-free at your end. So that I feel that usually really helps in terms of making that co-creation process, making that environment a little better for all the other participants. So that the element of them being heard is incredibly important. The reason why a lot of people in such setting go into conflict is because they feel that they're not heard. So within the process of designing, you've got to understand how you incorporate those features.
Well, I put this this way. I think future study can be redefined as a future generation studies. So why we have to forecast the lives of future generations? Because today we made a decision. We make a decision, and which impacts the life of future generations. So why we focus the future? Because we have to make a decision today. For what? For future generations. So if you think about the future of our future generations, and also present generation, and we can be more ethical, or balanced or not biased perspective. So always think about the life of our future generations in order to make a better decision today.
I completely agree with everything my colleagues just said. But maybe just to add, for us, what we've tried to do is pay attention to the power imbalances sometimes in a room. So just because you bring your representative from a marginalized community together in a room for a dialogue with more well-established policymaker doesn't mean that they're going to be equals or have equal voices. And so what we try to pay attention to is to try and amplify and facilitate the voices that we don't often hear from or not loud enough. So I would say, yeah, that's been helping also facilitating more inclusive imaginaries and futures.
Okay, yep. So, this is our final minute. We have 2 minutes. Then perhaps, the final question is just give us at least like 1 or 2 words that you think that is compelling that we can take away with us, at least urgently, as far as we are concerned, as foresight practitioners in building a truly inclusive future society. 1 or 2 words.
I would just say trust. I mean, I've recently been doing a lot of research around the element of trust and how you view that as a way to counter disinformation. So I feel that trust is a very important factor in terms of building any inclusivity in the processes and in the society that one wishes to see.
I think diversity is a kind of key word. Diversity can give us a kind of more opportunity or innovative way of thinking to make our society better. So how to embrace more diversity, diverse society? That is a kind of quick question for me to address.
I think I'll quote a colleague from UNDP who once said, there should be nothing about people without them. And I think that's very important when we think about the future and craft these desired futures is, again, having voices represented at the table.
Okay, so there you go. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the plenary.
Thank you, Shimon, and all panelists. Ladies and gents, for your information, Professor Shimon Cruz is the chair of the Association of Professional Futurists, a very key person in future studies indeed. Yeah. All right. Now, our moderated panel session is a significant exploration of oceanic futures, indigenous ways of knowing, Pacific practice, and impact. May I invite on stage our moderator, Emily Sharp, and our panelists, Sarah McCartney, Crystal Griffiths, and Christina Hazelman.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yes. Can you see me? Yes. Do you like what you see? Great. I know we've been sitting for a while. I don't know if you're like me. I've just been absorbing all of the amazing things that people have been doing. And some of you might know the expression, we're making it rain. Things are happening. So I'd just like you to loosen your shoulders a little bit. Hold out your hand. 1 finger, tap. 2 fingers. 3 fingers. 4 fingers. 5. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks for making it rain, Sarah. We're going to have a little bit of an informal conversation. We call it talanoa, or talk story. We're going to try and be quick so that if there is time for engagement with you, that would be awesome. I'm Emily Sharp, Director of Strategy, Performance and Learning in the Pacific Community. You've just met the fantastic Sarah, our Principal Strategy Advisor. Christina Hazelman, who is an amazing woman at knowledge management, communications, and just basic reach out. And of course, you've already met Crystal, our strategy and foresight advisor. We're from the Pacific community. And I thought I might just add a slide, because there's a few people who I've had a conversation with who've been wondering where the Pacific is. And so I thought perhaps we just start there. We are 22 Pacific countries and territories. We're 12 million people. 28 million square kilometres and 20% of the global EEZs. We're 98% ocean. So you'll see on the image. The disused future is small island developing states. Our preferred narrative is large ocean nations. So though you may feel like we're a bit insignificant when perhaps the total population of one nation is 1,500 people, the resources that those people are stewards of are significant, not only for the Pacific, but for the entire world. So we come on the shoulders of many great people who've been before us, telling great stories, and we hope to share some about our experience in working with Futures and Foresight. So our organisation is owned by its members. We're owned by the governments of the 22 Pacific Island countries and territories. We work across about 25 sectors. Whatever your national government look like, a Ministry of Agriculture, a Ministry of Health, we have those similar capabilities. So our team here has to learn to speak in many different kinds of languages and sometimes dance around many different kinds of images and screens. Here's an image of our head office in Noumea, New Caledonia. The vision is set by our members, and a few years ago our members gave us 3 priorities when it came to setting a strategic direction for the next decade. We were inclusive in our process. We used foresight. And our third one, thought leadership. Sorry, I just went blank there. So much thinking, too many thoughts. So we knew we couldn't do it alone, and we partnered with a few amazing people. We partnered with the University of Queensland, and we partnered with Suhail as well, bringing him along on the journey, trying to meet our members where they're at. Completely different context to each other. Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, so 3 sub-regions within the region, hundreds of languages, different ways of knowing and being, and keeping in mind to be inclusive, to use thought leadership, and to apply foresight. One of the questions yesterday was, how do you deal with such complexity? And for us, it was around values. And I'm going to now hand to Tina to tell you a little bit about that value story.
So behind me, you can see the 4 values that we were gifted during our strategic plan process. So the origin of the values is Engen Kelap, which comes from Ponape in the Federated States of Micronesia, Kaitiakitanga, which comes from the Maori language from New Zealand, Girakai Tuva, which comes from North Pentecost in Vanuatu, and Aroha, which comes from French Polynesia. So this is a cross-section of the 3 sub-regions within the Pacific, and I thought it was very representative of the diversity of our regions. So by nature, the Pacific culture is a very oral one. It's how our history, it's how our stories come down, and there's a lot of value in the use and the application of language, and our 75-year-old organization for the very first time had incorporated their languages into our strategy, and this in itself was futuristic and groundbreaking. Now, our fear was that it would become, we were warned that you got to make sure it's not a strategy on the shelf. And so when we began socializing, the first thing that our staff hooked into were the values. For a lot of our Pacific Island staff, it was the first time they'd seen their language in a formal document in an organization that represents them. And it became such a touch point and such a passion point for a lot of our conversations when we began talking about our strategy. It's become the hook of agreement whenever our science and our technical teams, which, you know, they don't often gel together because they feel they've got very different sectors and they're very specialized and there's no commonalities. And very quickly, these values and the use of the Pacific language and our shared understanding of what we want to achieve became the hook for us to then work on the future that we wanted, and it became the grounding point for a lot of our key focus areas. It became the grounding point for what we want to achieve over the next short and long-term thing for an organization. Yeah, sorry, that's a bit of history for you.
And I've really seen them in practice too. You know, they're not just on paper. So at the recent Pacific Ministers of Health meeting, our Director of Public Health opened with the values. And then the Minister from New Zealand was like, fantastic, we have this value too that's really similar. So high-level conversations are being opened with values, and so are our team meetings. But it's not always easygoing. Sometimes there are challenges too, and I think a lot of learning comes out of the challenges. So maybe could you reflect on a challenge or a lesson learned that you could share with everybody about leading from values?
So I think a challenge was the hesitation at first. So for a lot of us, it was the first time we were seeing one another's values, and there was some hesitation about using it. And I remember we had gotten a request through Emily from the senior leaders of the organization saying, you know, I don't know how to pronounce these values, so I don't feel like comfortable using it just yet. Could you please just help me record something so I could say it properly? And these were just within because of how diverse the Pacific is, we were scared to say one another's words. And so what we originally planned to do was develop a video where we had staff from these countries pronounce the values. But as we were recording, and just off the cuff, they began telling stories about where they've heard it when they were younger. They began explaining what it means from their very personal experiences with, you know, these values, and it became such a rich product. So we then expanded it to have a pronunciation video, but also an explanation. And from there, we found that people were then bringing their own values beyond these 4 values to conversations in order to make connections. We had a presentation with members where, off the cuff, one of our staff from Tonga had explained Tauiva, which is a Tongan value about the relationships between people. It translates as to spaces in between, and how when you come to a space, you need to acknowledge your relationship to one another, and then you have to honor that relationship, acknowledge where they might be at the hierarchy, and what you need to give to that relationship, because it's about reciprocity, it's about giving and taking, it's a partnership, it's not just something you come to empty. And so I thought that was a really good conflict resolution that we had.
Thanks, Tina. And that really resonates, I think, to do today and yesterday. A lot has come up around personal futures. What is your own story in the meta story? And we found that values are a great entry point for people to start thinking about what is their role, what is their own personal story in that meta story. I might hand to you now, Crystal, because thinking about individuals, you've been doing amazing work at reciprocity, and the generous time that the people we've been working with in testing and trialing futures and foresight. Sometimes we're told this isn't new. We've been doing this all the time. You're just calling it something different and facilitating it in a different way. But people are generous anyway. And Crystal's been doing amazing work at documenting that so that we can then share it on. Would you like to tell us a bit about what you've been doing?
Yeah, yes, I'd gladly. And this is the moment, Sahel, where we talk about our latest publication that's coming out. It's the Pacific Pathfinder. And related back to our values, the vision for the Pathfinder was the giving back, the reciprocity, and really connected to our value of Engen Kelep in terms of what you said this morning, Ivana, about building on others' work. So really it's our gifting back to the Futures community of our experience in practically implementing foresight, and also giving back to everyone that's participated in our Futures processes that we've supported and encouraged over the last 3 years. So the Pacific Pathfinder is going to be out in a few weeks, and will be available, and it has 10 of the tools that we've used over the last 3 years to build futures literacy and to support our strategic processes in the region. We have since then also been working with other tools, and I imagine that in a version 2.0, we will we will have other tools that we have borrowed and adapted from our international futures community, but also from the futures practice that is already taking place within our region, within the Pacific, and with practitioners there. So we're looking to uncover that.
So just to make that a little bit real, what Crystal's going to share with you is how we have been working with causal layered analysis and bringing in Pacific ways of knowing and being so that methodologies can really speak to the people that you're working with.
Thank you, Emily. When we have started the process of working with futures and introducing that, we found that the futures triangle was something that really resonated and was an easy entry point. But something that has a lot of resonance, and we've heard it over the last 2 days, is the CLA, the causal layered analysis. And when we first introduced it, we were a bit hesitant to see whether this would work and whether it would resonate, and we took that risk. And early on in the process, we were using the model that we've seen, which is the iceberg. And one of our staff members, who was also a certified futurist, said, why don't we use and overlay the island model of culture? And if you can see there, the things that you can easily recognize, the acts, really resonates with the litany and the different levels below. And for the people of the Pacific, for people that we've worked with, it really, the metaphors and the worldviews, that really resonated, because that's when we had those rich discussions about culture and worldviews. So that's something that we adapted for our region, and that is available as a tool for our Pacific practitioners in the Pathfinder.
It's not always smooth sailing, though, as you said, Crystal, and I think learning is always great to share. So maybe if you could just reflect on a moment that was, or an occasion, an audience, a tool that was really challenging to use, and perhaps what we've learned from that.
I might just say that when you said on learning, I think it's been a constant process, thinking about what's been shared from futurists that have been sharing and guiding us. And I think if you move to the next slides, we heard about the visual metaphors. Metaphors is something that really resonates with our Pacific communities. And so that was very rich. And also the metaphors and making it visual. So that was something that we really learned, is to make our strategy and our vision real for our members and for our staff, was to connect it to the visuals. So we worked with Pacific artists to really take our metaphors that were delivered and then put a real picture behind it and make it representative, make it inclusive. So if you see up here on the first one picture, you've got the bountiful baskets and canoes for food systems. So it shows all the different foods that are available and that we use. And then for planetary health, our vision for planetary health for 2031, healthy manner. So the connection of the earth, animal health, people health, the connections around that. And then the other one, which has resonance for transforming our organization, was to many weavers, one fine mat. So all working together to achieve transformation.
And a real collaboration between Crystal and Christina as well, and the Pacific artist we used. People were then like, oh, I need to hear the story about these images. What do they mean? And so Crystal and Christina worked with Tui, the artist, to then make a video that talked about the process of going from a metaphor to a visual, and how it can be really difficult to make sure you capture a story that's inclusive of 22 Pacific island countries and territories, cultures. And that again is another way to socialize and make accessible something that could feel tangible and conceptual to something that can be understandable. Speaking about tangible and conceptual, Sarah's always very good at taking us back to, well, what does this mean today? How do we ground this in action? So I might just ask you, Sarah, to extrapolate on that kind of bringing us back to what does this mean next?
Thank you, Emily. It hasn't always been an easy journey. I think I heard some of you speak over the last day or so of people saying futures, crystal balls, airy-fairy, blue sky thinking, you're never going to get anywhere. And what we really found with the backcasting tool was that lovely marriage between all that we've talked about and that metaphor of weaving it back together again, giving everyone a little bit of what they want. And it really, for backcasting, it's really the embodiment of action. So all that talking, what's next, what's the impact? And it's really about the actionable steps. And we just heard from the last panel about acting in the present to shape our future. That all sounds really good too. You've got different people in the room, different perspectives, different worldviews. We've been asked to address those, acknowledge those. And so you have to, again, play with the, not are we there yet, but we're already there. And sometimes people are like, but we're not there yet. And it's sort of like managing. It's easier to be in the future for some, more challenging for others. And I think one of my favourite was putting our senior leadership team into a bit of a speed dating exercise of where they were already married with children and grandchildren and how did they get there through an organisational lens. And they took to it like a duck to water. I was really surprised, but just being able to meet people in their spaces, in their mindsets, and where they were feeling was really quite useful. And still, backcasting still has its challenges because people will see the obstacles rather than the opportunities. And so having that CLA journey really helps to uncage the mind. I think I heard that was an expression. Sorry if I'm stealing it from yesterday, but I liked it. But really from the Pacific, from the values perspective, I'd like to use Gita Gai Tuva, which we have down in English as unity. But it means we go together as a community, and so we lose sense of individualism, of organisation, and we look to the greater good. And again, yes, that might sound a little bit world peace, love, but that's okay. That also has a place, but it's really stepping back to remind ourselves that we're just stewards of this world. And what we do is for our children, our grandchildren, and those. And so in the Pacific, we walk backwards into the future. Some have said to deconstruct our history, but we use our constructive history because it is very much part of our identity, who we are, and how we serve our environment and those by us. So what's next? If we do backcasting, we have those tangible products, it all looks great. You go like, yep, step 1, step 2, step 3. Who's going to make it rain? And that's where the accountability factor comes in. So whilst you can have that really great speed approach to what's happening, you've also got to ground it in that responsibility and the accountability to each other and to those who serve. So I'll stop because I won't give up this mic or the thing. But we come back to the theme, which is about our inclusion and well-being. And I think from the Pacific, it's been a real revisiting of our culture and of our identity and being able to reimagine it through the futures and foresight work that's been so generously shared, especially through APFN. We've learnt a lot. And so together, I think if I could just leave us with this for what's next. We're going to be shaping minds, inspiring hearts, positively transforming our world together. We always need a what's next. Keep you coming back for more. Thank you.
So I'm just going to give the audience a few minutes to think about if there's any question or dialogue or response or dance that you'd like to share with us. And while you're thinking of that, I'm just going to also look to Crystal and Christina and see if there's any final message that you didn't get to say that you'd like to share.
Just that if you are interested in having a look at the Pathfinder, I have a few model copies that you can flip through today, or if you're interested in getting the copy when it becomes available, you can just provide me your email, and I'll direct you to the website where it's at.
I just have the opportunity to just say one more value on behalf of the Pacific. And this is from Tonga, and it's Si Pekai Ha, which means we're small, but we're going to show up anyway.
Okay, time now for you to interact. Are there any questions? And do I need to share this mic with the audience?
Any questions?
Thanks, Emily and team. This is not maybe directed to Sarah, but you mentioned accountability. So I'm curious what evaluation, impact evaluation work Pacific Community has done in regards to maybe past projects that had a foresight element, and 5-7 years later you can look at that impact.
So what we did, we've embedded the values in our strategic results framework, and we've embedded the vision state also. And so twice a year, the whole of the organisation has, at the mid-year, a reflection process. So whether you're 100 staff, 150 staff, or a team of 10, you stop and you pause and you reflect on how are we living our values? What is like a little story that we can tell about how living this value has enabled us to do some work, a particular piece of work, and what has been our progress, and what are our challenges, and what are our lessons learned. At the end of the year, we all come together and we share those stories, and then that gets embedded in our annual results report, which is our accountability to our members. We've got Horizons reviews at the 3, 5, 8 year marks. And at the 3-year mark, they have different purpose. So at the 10-year, it will definitely be impact. At the 3-year, we're focusing on what we call KFA 7, which is about institutional effectiveness, and how much have we progressed towards that 10-year vision statement, and what is transforming our institution and enabling us to do in relation to food systems, in relation to planetary health. Where and with whom and how is it that we're creating change towards impact, but it might be change in behaviour, change in knowledge, might be system level, structural level change. So, and that gets published on the pacificdatahub.org. It's there as a report, and it's also there as an interactive results framework that you can navigate by SDG, by country, by free text. So that's our commitment to transparency. Thanks, great question.
Can you elaborate a little bit about the role of the leaders? I mean, you say you're small, so probably it's easier to access a minister. I recall that you brought actually a minister into the Pacific session last year online, and I think many of us were very impressed about how committed he was to future thinking. So what's their role, and have you managed to access a lot of the leaders to take ownership of future thinking?
Yeah, that was Minister Kofi, and please Google him. He's doing amazing work in Tuvalu around the future of his nation in the metaverse. I think COVID enabled us to have a captured audience, number one. So ministers are normally very busy flying around the place, but they were in one place, so we had more access to them. And our sister organisation was also developing its 2050 strategy, to which leaders are very accountable. So we used all of our political economy and all of our soft influencing skills to be able to be methods accompaniers of that process. That's still ongoing. And for example, and I'll hand the mic to Sarah, often we're in the background, we're invisible. And so Sarah was almost invisible when it came to New Caledonia running their own Futures and Foresight sessions with citizens to then be able to feed that up to all of the leaders, the heads of state. So I'll just let you talk about that a bit, Sarah.
You can see me? Always wanted to say that. No, I think leadership is really important. We all have a role to play, and I think it was wonderful hearing from Senator Pia yesterday, and just that drive and that motivation that gets people jumping. You know, one person can say jump, and the other one's like, yeah, tomorrow. So you need the right people and the trust that we've heard about. Again, the accountability and the responsibilities. And I think when we're using the word leaders, we're talking about prime ministers and presidents, but leaders are at every level of society. And we're seeing, and I'll leave this one for Crystal to answer, we're seeing a real uptick in our sectors, whether it's agriculture and forestry, whether it's maritime transportation, which we saw a little bit with ADB this morning. And they're like, hey, this futures thing, it's unsticking the stuck. You know, people are getting paralyzed. We're having, this is the 38th task force meeting. What on earth is going wrong? What are you people doing? So maybe I'll hand over to Crystal to just highlight some of the different sectoral leaders asking for futures.
Okay, land resources, climate change, oceans, which one? Public health, maritime. Glad I've got my colleagues here. I don't think I should have the mic. Thank you.
And I think the demonstration is when it's a demand and not a supply. So when people come to us and say, oh, we need to work with the International Maritime Organization, we need to work with FAO, can you help us translate this? Can you help us facilitate that? Then I think, as Sarah said, that speaks to trust, and that speaks to living our values, that it's the members who are wanting to engage, but sometimes don't want to feel the shame of saying to that big UN body, we don't quite know how. So they feel that it's okay to work with us to then go back to first principle. What is this about? What are we trying to achieve? How can we use language that is accessible to really help influence all leaders, as you said, Sarah? Yeah.
All right, we have about 3 more minutes. Are there any more questions? Or perhaps maybe you guys would like to wrap up, conclude?
I think one question that I'm left with is for all of us in the room, as Sarah said, what's next? What's next for all of us as a collective? When we leave at the end of a very successful 2 days, what do we mean to each other and what we've learned? How can we continue to spark? How can we continue to amplify and achieve more than we were when we hadn't met each other? For me, my commitment is I've met a couple of really amazing individuals. And I think, in particular, one that I'll share is I think there's a lot to say around the future is female. There's some amazing women in this space. And my commitment is that we will connect virtually so that next time we're in person, we've got some more stories to tell. So maybe if we all can think about ways to keep this going, so it's not just about sharing, but it's also about acting.
All right, thank you very much. Everyone give it up for Emily, Sarah, Crystal, and Christina. All right, ladies and gents, we have now come to the end of the morning session. All right. Okay, before we go for our lunch, I would like to inform that we will be sending out a shared folder link containing a presentation slides, the presentation slides to all attendees within 2 weeks' time. Yeah? This will be done after we have received consent from our esteemed presenters. All right.